Good evening, everyone. My name is Kate, and I'm the chairwoman of Young Americans for Freedom, or YAF, here at AU. First and foremost, I want to thank you all for coming tonight. For those of you who are unfamiliar with YAF, we are a conservative activist organization dedicated to uniting students over the ideas of limited government, free enterprise, individual liberty, traditional values, and a strong national defense. At a school as political as ours, it is crucial to diversify the conversation. That, while strengthening conservatives' confidence, is what we hope to do with YAF. As principled conservatives, we focus on the why. We break down each issue and discuss their implications. After being named Chapter of the Month in September by our national headquarters, we are very confident and excited for our future success here at AU. If you have any interest in joining our organization, we encourage you to reach out to us over social media or to find me or one of the board members afterwards to learn how to get connected. With that, this event was generously sponsored by anonymous donors, and on their behalf, I share the following message. This lecture is a part of Young America's Foundation's exclusive 10 campus tour, the Dinesh D'Souza Tour, Fake History Debunked. The generous anonymous sponsors of this lecture tour ask that we share the following statement explaining why it is important that you hear from Dinesh D'Souza tonight. Here's their statement. Students deserve to receive an education based on unbiased facts, not revisionist history. Sadly, too few students today benefit from a robust understanding of the ideas and events that shape our world. Because too few schools offer perspectives that challenge the leftist worldview, that is not education, it is indoctrination. And it is not just unfair to students, it's dangerous. We are alarmed that today's young people are taught to believe that freedom, the great protector against tyranny, should be forfeited in pursuit of the progressive agenda. We are sponsoring this 10 campus lecture tour to give you the opportunity to consider that ideas that may not be taught and may not even be tolerated on your campus. You will be hearing from Dinesh D'Souza, one of today's most intelligent, articulate, courageous scholars. We are pleased to partner with Dinesh and Young America's Foundation to reach thousands of young people to inspire you to pursue knowledge, challenge leftist misinformation, and advance freedom and prosperity for all. May tonight's lecture inspire you to never stop learning. And on that note, I'd like to invite our Vice Chairman Wyatt to introduce tonight's speaker.
Thank you, everyone. I'm Wyatt Dobrowicz-Vago. I am the chapter vice chair. I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight to hear Mr. D'Souza speak. Born in India, Mr. Dinesh D'Souza came to the U.S. as an exchange student, and he graduated from Dartmouth College in 1983. Since then, D'Souza has been a prominent career as a writer, scholar, and a public intellectual. He has also come as a renowned filmmaker with top-grossing documentaries in 2016, such as Hillary's America, Obama's America, and most recently, a very good film, in my opinion, is Death of a Nation. A former policy analyst from the Reagan White House, D'Souza also served as John N. Fellow of the American Enterprise Institute, and from the Robert and Karen Kuswa Fellow at the Hoover Institute at Stanford University. He served as the president of King's College in New York City from 2010 to 2012. D'Souza has been named as one of America's most influential conservative thinkers by the New York Times Magazine. World Affairs Council lists him as one of the nation's 500 leading authors on international issues, and Newsweek cited him as one of the country's most prominent Asian Americans. In the fall of 2014, D'Souza found himself hauled into federal court for improperly donating money to a friend who was running for the Senate. D'Souza pleaded guilty, apologized for his offense, and was sentenced to 8 months in a state-run confinement center near his home in San Diego. D'Souza prolonged his exposure, and the hardened criminal upper case provided an eye-opening education to American realities. D'Souza has since gotten a pardon by President Donald Trump, and D'Souza is one of his favorite venues for debates and speeches has been college campuses just like this. During the past 25 years, he has appeared on hundreds of colleges and universities. He has spoken with hundreds and thousands of students in these live settings. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Mr. Dinesh D'Souza.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be here on a kind of fateful day in American politics. The United States in 2018 is probably more fractured, more divided than at any time since 1860, when Abraham Lincoln, an outsider, a Republican, won a close election, and one may say all hell broke loose. I've been trying to make sense of the results of yesterday. I think we'd have to say that there was no blue wave and there was no red wave. What we got was a certain kind of political draw. But that's not a meeting in the middle, but rather that the Democrats had one good thing happen and the Republicans have had one good thing happen, which is now topped off by a second good thing. For the Democrats, the good thing is to capture the House. And that's important not because the Democrats can do anything with it, but it does give them a sort of place to launch projectiles. And it gives them a chance to launch investigations. Of course, they can pass legislation, but it's going to go nowhere. It is also a way to check Trump. And I suspect that there is a feeling in America, among some people, including some Republicans, that Trump is a man who could use a little bit of checking. Now, on the Republican side, there is also good news, and that is that Republicans have a kind of secure majority in the Senate, which the Republicans didn't have before. So the Republicans have actually traded control. Before, they really had the House, but they didn't have the Senate. And they were dependent on a very precarious one or two votes, particularly for court appointments, and that's why the Kavanaugh thing was just so close. But now Republicans have a clean majority in the Senate, and that means that Ruth Bader Ginsburg better take her vitamins, because otherwise we could quickly go from 5-4 to 6-3, and it is not inconceivable that you could also have 7-2. So if you ask most Republicans, would you trade the House for a reasonable shot at 6-3 or 7-2 on the court, I suspect most would make that bargain very quickly. Today something very interesting happened, and that is that Jeff Sessions, aka Rip Van Winkle, has been put out on the sidewalk. And the reports are that Rod Rosenstein, his sidekick, the initiator of the Mueller investigation, might soon follow. This is really important because Trump's great weakness in the past 2 years has been that the guy does not control his own Justice Department. This is because of Trump's greatest mistake of his presidency, which was not to fire Comey and Rosenstein on day one. He could have done it easily, no one would have questioned it, it would have saved him a whole lot of problems. One of the downsides of being an outsider is that you come in and you sort of try to figure things out. And by the time you figured them out, all kinds of things have taken off, including the appointment of a special prosecutor. But now Trump has actually the chance to name his own guy. And what that means is that if the Democrats initiate investigations, the Justice Department can initiate counter-investigations. And this is all a way of saying that American politics has entered a sort of fractious, troubling phase. There's a breakdown of civility. I think we know that. There's certainly a rising level of emotional intensity. We know that. I just saw on social media a video of a protester screaming about my presence here tonight. He, white guy, and he goes, "You don't know what it means to be a person of color." And I thought, well, if there's one thing I do know, it's that. And if there's one thing you don't, it's that. But nevertheless, this notion of me being educated by whites on what it is like to be an immigrant, not a new experience, but nevertheless intriguing. I want to speak tonight about the sort of deep undertow of this debate. It's a kind of culture war. Some would call it a cold civil war. It's obviously not a hot civil war. You don't have grand armies moving across plains. But it's a cold civil war in that there is a clear secession of the American mind. And what I mean by that is that you have two groups of Americans who see the same things, the same facts. Let's say the Kavanaugh hearings. But they see them completely differently. And intellectually, this is a problem. How is it possible for intelligent people to see the same facts and interpret them so differently? Well, clearly, they're bringing different assumptions, a different lens, you might say, to the camera. And there are premises embedded in the debate that are completely rejected by the other side. Believe all victims. Or even take something like he said, she said. Now, for those of us who are supporters of Kavanaugh, this was not a case of he said, she said. Why? Because he said, she said only applies in a situation where both parties are completely unknown and you have no basis for actually assigning credibility to either one. If a cop goes into a domestic violence complaint, he said, she said. You don't know anything about the two parties, and so you have to give them equal credibility or equal lack of credibility. But with Kavanaugh, it's not like that. And with Kavanaugh, it's more like something like this. Someone comes out and accuses Albert Einstein of faking his equations. Well, that's not he said, she said. Albert Einstein is a public figure. Innumerable scientists have testified to his credibility and intellectual probity. And in the case of Kavanaugh, you have innumerable people who have worked with him over decades testifying to his personal decency and rectitude. And then you have a complete nobody who pops out of nowhere, scrubs our social media. So that's not he said, she said. You have two figures of completely unequal public credibility. And so anyone who starts the debate with he said, she said is distorting the lens of the debate, distorting the lens of the argument. Well, now, I use the Kavanaugh example merely to make a point, which is that there is a divide, and the divide is over facts, over news, over what some people call fake news. I'm going to talk tonight not so much about fake news, but I'm going to talk about fake scholarship, and I'm going to talk about fake history. And fake scholarship and fake history are the key to the narrative that the political left has generated in America. And all our public accusations are based upon this deeper narrative. If the narrative is false, a lot of what we hear in the public domain collapses. So take something really simple. Trump is a fascist. We hear this all the time. We've been hearing it since Trump's election. If you turn on Rachel Maddow, Chris Maddow, Trump is a fascist. They know it. But this notion, this accusation that Trump is a fascist is parasitic on a deeper claim. And the deeper claim is fascism is a phenomenon of the right. It's a right-wing thing. Think about it. If fascism were a left-wing, then it would make no sense to call Trump a fascist. And yet the notion that fascism is right-wing is not something recent. It wasn't concocted with Trump. It's in fact 75 years old. This notion that fascism is on the right started after World War II. It's in our textbooks. It's on the History Channel. It's in Wikipedia. It's all over the place. And yet, this notion that fascism is on the right is rarely challenged. It's rarely challenged. And in fact, it is so dangerous to challenge it. We see it right now, that when you begin to do it, it disturbs people. It unnerves them. Why? Because their worldview is at stake. If I could demonstrate tonight that fascism was on the left, the real fascists would have to shut up. The real fascists would have to suddenly say, wait a minute, we have been masquerading as anti-fascists. We excuse all kinds of barbaric conduct, threatening people, intimidating them, shouting at them, beating them up on the grounds that those guys are the fascists and we are the anti-fascists. But if the truth is the opposite, then the whole political landscape has to be redrawn and the real thugs become unmasked for who they are. So I'm going to take that risk tonight of pushing down and examining a couple of key episodes of American history just to ask two questions. Who are the real racists? And who are the real fascists? Yes, buckle your seatbelts. Buckle your seatbelts. I'm going to start with the issue of racism. Racism which became embedded in America because of the long-standing practice of slavery. Slavery was, you might say, the institutionalized context for racism in the United States. And yet, this racism, interestingly enough, is always blamed by the left on the American founders. They started it. They're the culprits. And the proof of this, if you want to pick it right off progressive literature from Howard Zinn or any of these other shady characters who masquerade as historians, it's the 3/5 clause. Hey, it says right there in the Constitution, African Americans are worth 3/5 of a human being. Now, if this were true, we would have to admit that the American founding was seriously flawed. But it so happens that it is demonstrably not true. And it is easy to verify by simply looking at the context for the actual debate, which was a debate between the North and the South. And it was a debate not over slavery directly, but over political representation, over the assignment of congressmen, for example. And in this debate, very interestingly, the North wanted blacks to count for 0. And the South wanted blacks to count for 1. Why? Because the South wanted more representation to strengthen the power of slavery. And the North wanted to count blacks for 0, not because they were racist, but because they wanted to weaken the power of the South. And the 3/5 compromise was a middle ground between the North and the South, in a sense, the two sides agreeing to find a point at which they could both move ahead. And one can debate if this was a good compromise or not. But what one cannot debate is that this said absolutely nothing about the intrinsic value of black life or about the intrinsic value of blacks as human beings. The issue was the North was using the compromise to break the back of slavery in the South and weaken the power of Southern representation. This is an historical fact. I want to vault forward a little bit and now come to Abraham Lincoln. And I come to Lincoln because Lincoln was the great student of the American founding. And Lincoln is very important because today the left has tried to appropriate Lincoln. Lincoln was a liberal. Lincoln was a progressive. If Lincoln had lived today, he would be, a member of Antifa. Really? Now, history is a matter of trying to get into the spirit and the mind of people who lived at the time. The interesting thing about Abraham Lincoln is not once in his life or his writings did he ever call himself a liberal. Not once did he ever call himself a progressive. In fact, the whole concept of progressivism developed later. It's a phenomenon in the late 19th century and the early 20th century, after Lincoln. The one thing that Lincoln did call himself repeatedly was, you guessed it, a conservative. And what Lincoln said is, I am conserving the principles of the American founding. Now, when Lincoln described slavery, he described it this way: you work, I eat. And this is a very profound understanding of slavery. It's not even racial. The basic idea is one guy gets to work, and the other guy steals the fruit of his labor and disposes of it as he deems fit. So this is slavery. It's essentially confiscation and theft. And Lincoln says very interestingly, this is the credo, not of the South, but of the Democratic Party in the North and the South. This is what Democrats believe. This is who they are at their core. And then Lincoln defines who the Republicans are, by contrast. He goes, Republicans believe, quote, The hand that makes the corn has the right to put the corn into its own mouth. The principle here is very simple. People should get to keep the fruit of their own labor. It's the anti-slavery principle. We own ourselves. We have a right to keep what we earn. And here's Lincoln's definition of social justice. You keep what you make, and I'll keep what I make. The street sweeper has no more right to take the earnings of the brain surgeon than the brain surgeon has the right to take the earnings of the street sweeper. This is Lincoln's doctrine. And I mention this because today, it's not uncommon for me on campus to encounter professors. Well, Dinesh, you absolutely know that the two parties switch sides. Well, did they really switch sides? Let's examine. Isn't it true today that the core principle of Trump and of the Republican Party is that the hand that makes the corn should eat the corn? And is it not a fact? Well, we're happy to discuss it. I think it is. And the core principle of the Democratic Party today is also just the one that Lincoln defined. You work and I eat. One guy gets to work and another group of scoundrels confiscates what he earns or she earns and disposes of it as they see fit. What's very interesting about this is that despite party change, the parties have changed, there are also deep veins of continuity. And this deep vein of continuity shows that the fundamental core principle of the parties, a pro-market, pro-upward mobility, free society, which Lincoln championed, that's what we conservatives in America are fighting for now. Now, Lincoln named what he called the four horsemen. He didn't say of the apocalypse, but he meant of slavery. The four bad guys of slavery. And it's very important to pay attention to this because what Lincoln is showing is that these four guys are not Southerners. In fact, only one of the four is a Southerner. Lincoln names Roger Taney, the author of the Dred Scott decision, from Maryland. Lincoln counts him as a Southerner. And then we have Franklin Pierce, the former president, from New Hampshire, Northern Democrat. And James Buchanan, the sitting president, from Pennsylvania, Northern Democrat. And Stephen Douglas of Illinois, Northern Democrat. Now, the reason this is really important is that right now there are massive statues of Douglas, of Pierce, of Buchanan, all standing in their hometowns, untouched by Antifa or Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter and Antifa are in the South, knocking down statues, knocked down Robert E. Lee, knocked down the Confederate statue. This Confederate soldier was a bad guy. First of all, this Confederate soldier, the nameless Confederate soldier, which is the majority of the statues, was typically a dirt poor farmer or laborer. He didn't own a single slave, and when asked why he was fighting in the Civil War, his simple answer was because the Yankees are down here. You want to make that guy the bad guy of American history? If you do, it's fake history. You're a fake. Why? Because that's not the bad guy. The bad guy were the conspirators in the North who worked with the plantation owners in the South to sustain slavery. And Lincoln had their number. But progressives have to hide the complicity of the Northern Democrats because what they're doing is taking the crimes of the Democratic Party and foisting them on the South. They're basically trying to hold the South accountable for what they did. And Lincoln was onto them then, and I have to say I'm kind of onto them now. I now want to fast forward from Lincoln and a couple of words I've said about slavery to fascism. I want to come to the 20th century, moving us along the swift course of history. And I want to address a question that Trump sort of kicked up when he said he was a nationalist. And of course, there was somebody on CNN saying, how can you use that word? Nationalist. It's like Hitler. Now, Hitler, in fact, was a nationalist. But so was my countryman Gandhi. And so was Mandela in South Africa. And so was Winston Churchill. And so was de Gaulle. And so was Abraham Lincoln. And all the anti-colonial leaders were nationalists. So clearly, there is more than one type of nationalism. What is the type of nationalism that defined Hitler? And by extension, Mussolini, and by extension, all the fascist movements in Belgium, in France, in Germany, in Italy, in England, and so on. And the answer is there's only one thing that identified that type of nationalism, and that was its marriage with socialism. The essence of fascism is the marriage of nationalism and socialism. And the reason that the left can never admit this is that the moment they do, their whole big lie blows up, and National Socialism is vividly exposed as a phenomenon of the left. Now, I'm not just alleging this in some vague sense. I actually, in my book, look at the founding fathers of fascism in numerous countries. I'm going to take the simple example of France. There was a powerful fascist movement in France. When the Germans invaded France, these people became the intellectual soul of the Vichy regime. And these guys, the founders of French fascism, were all men of the left. There is no exception to this rule. Jean Alemán, who was involved with the Dreyfus case, the so-called grandfather of French socialism, one of the founders of French fascism. Marcel Diet, prominent socialist, became the leader of the fascist movement in France. Jacques Doriot was the head of the French Communist Party, and he became a leading fascist. Mussolini in Italy, his chief advisor, was the founder of Italian fascism, a friend of Lenin. And when Mussolini started the fascist movement in Italy, he got a telegram of congratulations from Lenin, who recognized him as a fellow revolutionary of the left. Now, why was National Socialism so leftist? What was it trying to accomplish? The basic idea of fascism was government control over the private economy and government control over the lives of citizens. That's the meaning of fascism. That's what it is. That's what the Nazis were all about, the National Socialist Party. In my movie, well, well, we have some Dr. Ford enthusiasts here. Let me ask you this question. Let me ask you guys this question. Well, okay, if you'll stop chanting, I'll address your point. Here's something interesting. Where is Dr. Ford? You know, this is really interesting. When I noticed that when Roy, hold on, don't shout at me, you'll have a chance to ask questions. When Roy Moore was attacked by all these women, he oppressed me, he did this, he did that. And suddenly, when he's defeated, they all melt into air. This is Karl Marx, all that is solid melts into air. Suddenly, the media, hold on, don't shout at me, don't shout at me. No, you came voluntarily. Did I ask you to come? No, don't shout at me. I'm defending fascism. No, I'm exposing you as a fascist. Because do you realize, I'll tell you how. You asked me a question. Hold on. Are you familiar with the black shirts in Italy or the brown shirts in Germany? Do you realize that they would go to campuses, goons, and would stand in the back of the room, and when somebody tried to make an intelligent presentation and answer questions, they would shout them down, yell at them, try to intimidate them, and count as success if they could get the event canceled and the speaker threatened. But see, the problem is, sometimes you get speakers like me who are not scared of people like you. We recognize your frauds. I recognize that ultimately you are afraid of ideas. You're not willing to engage with me. Yes, you're afraid of ideas. You're not afraid of fascists. You think I pose a threat to you? I'm an immigrant. I came to America with nothing. What threat do I pose to you?
You promoted dangerous, violent ideas that kill millions of people.
I propose dangerous, violent ideas that kill people? Who have I killed?
You look at capitalism. You are a part of
Capitalism? Do you realize that Hitler's deadly opponent was capitalism? Have you read the Nazi 25-point platform? Let me give you a few themes from it. State control of the banks. Do you support that? No. State control of healthcare. Do you support that? State control of education. Do you support that? No. All right. What I'm trying to get at is the fascist ideology is one that is distinctly on the left. Whether or not you personally support it.
not any political theory. Fascism is specifically on the right. It is talking about a race superior to another. You are not problem. The left has been co-opted.
All right, hold on. I don't look. In fairness, there's going to be plenty of time to engage you. But let me just say this. No movement that calls itself a national socialist movement is going to be on the right. And the idea that the fascists are right-wing because they support racial superiority, wait a minute. The guy who showed the Ku Klux Klan movie in the White House was Woodrow Wilson, a progressive Democrat. So progressivism was married to racism at the hip. So don't pretend it was a right-wing phenomenon. It wasn't. Now, let me continue because this segues right into where I was before, and that is I was talking about a scene in my movie, a scene that I think if you didn't know my work, you would find kind of bewildering. And that is you have a group of Nazis, the top Nazis in 1935, who are making the Nuremberg laws, which make Jews into second-class citizens. They involve segregation of Jews into ghettos, outlawing intermarriage between Jews and other Germans, and confiscation of Jewish property. And these guys making the Nuremberg laws, interestingly, you'll see them in the movie, they have in their hands the democratic laws of the Jim Crow South. They have the American laws made by the Democrats, and they are crossing out the word black and writing in the word Jew. I'm not saying that the Nazis had similar laws to the Democrats. I'm saying they got it from the Democrats. They were indirectly influenced by the democratic laws, and they used them as a model. Now, you might ask, Dinesh, the opposition retreats out of ideas. No problem. They can't argue this stuff. It's because they don't know anything, but they have a lot of heat. And the combination of anger and ignorance can only result in outbursts of irritation or fleeing the room. And the intellect is suppressed by this kind of unfortunate process. And it's the job of education to kind of prevent it. But unfortunately, it's become kind of widespread. All right. So now you might say, wait a minute, Dinesh, you're showing a scene of Nazis learning from Democrats, and I have never heard this in my life, and I consider myself an educated person, and I've never read a book about it, and it's not in any textbook in high school or in college, and I concede that's true. So I ask the question, how is this possible? Where am I getting it? The answer is I'm getting it from a whole body of historical scholarship, including the Yale legal historian James Whitman and his recent book, Hitler's American Model, in which Whitman has the transcripts of the meeting and he lays it out chapter and verse. And he's familiar with my work and he has never criticized me in public for this. Here's the interesting thing with Whitman. He's a progressive. He's on the left. He doesn't want to put the blame on the left, even though he knows it belongs there. And so he hides this by switching Democrat to American. Notice Hitler's American model. Hitler got it from America. But these were democratic laws. Think about this. This is the fact that is left out of James Whitman's book. Every segregation law in the American South from the 1880s to the 1950s was passed by a Democratic legislature, signed by a Democratic governor, enforced by Democratic officials, and there is no exception to this rule. Once you plug in that fact, you realize that Hitler's American model should be retitled Hitler's Democratic model. Now, I mention all this, by the way, because this is not just history. The reason we're talking about history is because if we look around objectively today, I think we would have to admit that the fascist streak that we see in American politics, and I admit it's there, but it's predominantly on the left. Who are the people suppressing speech? They come from the left. Who are the people who use the weapons of the state against their political opponents? They're on the left. I'll give you an example from my own infamous case, and somebody mentioned it earlier. I go before the Justice Department. This is the team ultimately headed by Obama, of course, but Eric Holder, and in New York City, Preet Bharara, this fellow Indian guy of mine, fellow of a very recognizable Indian type. If you watch the movie Slumdog Millionaire, he is one of the ringleaders in that movie. A water boy, someone who's willing to do work for the bad guys. And so they sit me down, they go, Dinesh, did you exceed the campaign finance laws? And I go, well, I actually did. I was trying to help a friend of mine, a Dartmouth friend of mine I've known for 25 years. I didn't mean to do it, but I did it. And so I'll take whatever penalty other people get for doing the same thing. And the US government says to me, no, that's not our idea at all. We're going to get you for bank fraud. And I go, bank fraud? They go, yeah, because you took your money out of the bank. And then I go, wow. And then they go, we're going to get you for mail fraud. And I go, mail fraud? They go, yeah, because you put your check in the mail. And it then occurred to me that what was going on was that the US government was using this accordion of federal statutes to re-describe my offense in 6 different ways, attach a charge to each one, and use laws that were designed to get rid of Al Capone and the mafia and ISIS, laws of surveillance, laws of intimidation. If you can't get Capone on murder, let's get him on this technicality. They were using this against US citizens to go after their political opponents. And if that's not fascism, I don't know what is. And I saw it firsthand. Now, racism. A very good question to ask is, where is the racism today? Where is the racism today? If the parties did not switch sides, as they manifestly did not, the proof of this, by the way, is you simply, this is the beauty of living today. We all have a phone, and the left, let's just take the Princeton historian Kevin Cruz, the racist Dixiecrats all became Republicans because of Richard Nixon's tricky strategy, tricky Dick and all that. All right. For our proof, we make a list of all the racist Dixiecrats, and there they are, about 200 of them. These are the people who joined the Dixiecrat Party, or they voted against the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And now we ask, how many became Republicans? Let's count. And the correct answer is 2. 1 in the House, Albert Watson, 1 in the Senate, Strom Thurmond, and all the other racist Dixiecrats lived and died and are lionized to this day in the Democratic Party, and there are buildings right here in Washington, D.C. named after them. So this notion that the racist Dixiecrats became Republicans is an empirical falsehood and a flat lie. Now, where is the racism today? People say, Dinesh, are you actually saying the Democratic Party is the same as it was in 1830? No, I'm not saying that. But I am saying that the progressive left has faked the evidence of racism and tried to pin the racist tail on the Republican elephant by claiming that the neo-Nazis and the Ku Klux Klan and the white nationalists are all Trump supporters. Well, what is the proof for this remarkable statement? Has anyone actually done a survey, a poll, a count, provided any empirical data whatsoever to show? I'm happy to listen to everyone answer me. I like that kind of slaughterhouse aspect of the Q&A, so save it for then. But what I'm getting at here is that there is no such empirical evidence in existence. The only proof for white supremacists being Trumpsters is the images of Charlottesville of white nationalists wearing Trump hats. And since I smelled a rat, I've actually done an investigation of the leading white nationalists to a man and to a woman. And if you read my book, you will see that every single one of them has a deep history in the left. Jason Kessler, the organizer of both Charlottesville rallies, longtime Obama activist, Occupy Wall Street guy. That's a fact. And it's a fact known to the media at the time, but suppressed. Number 2, the editor of the neo-Nazi website, Andrew Anglin, is a leftist and environmentalist, hates white people, is open about it. That's a fact. And in the movie, if you watch my movie, I bring in Richard Spencer, the poster boy of white supremacy, and what ensues is an eye-opening interview in which I ask him simple questions that make it blindingly obvious that he is on the far left. Who's his favorite president? They're all Democrats. What does he think of Reagan? He hates him. What does he think of national health care? Great idea. Does he think our rights come from God? No. Where'd they come from? They come from the state. And on it goes. And so you're viewing this, and it suddenly dawns on you that you have been subjected to the fakest of fake news, a massive public relations con that presents the white nationalists as right-wing when, to a man, and out of their own mouths, they are all left-wing. Now, if they're not the racists, usually when someone says the racism is over there and they're trying to hide something, what they really mean is, don't look over here. One of the things I want to suggest, and I'll leave you with this and open the door to questions, is that the Democratic Party has always been the party of the plantation. The plantation defines the Democratic Party. It always has. By the way, the plantation does not define the founding. There were plantations at the time of the founding, but not so many. It was Eli Whitney's invention of the cotton gin that produced the massive, that was in 1793, by the way, that produced the massive expansion of the cotton plantations. The cotton industry began to spread in the American South in the 19th century, and a political party, the Democratic Party, arose to defend, advocate, and protect the plantation in the North and the South. Now, where's the plantation today? If you read the historian Kenneth Stamp in his book, The Peculiar Institution, he says that the plantation, the old slave plantation, was characterized by 5 features: dilapidated housing, slave quarters; broken families, because slavery was nowhere legal in any slave state for the slaves; third, no advancement, no one gets ahead; 4, there's a high degree of violence to hold the place together, because slavery, of course, is based on force; and 5th, a pervasive atmosphere of nihilism and despair. And what I suggest is that today we find those exact same 5 features in the black ghettos, in the Latino barrios, on the Native American reservations. We find them not just in Oakland and Detroit and St. Louis. We find them in the Latino barrios of South Texas and LA. We find them in the Pine Ridge Reservation, which I visited in South Dakota. And as you walk around and you look around, you see all the essential features of the old slave plantation, and there they are, and it's one-party rule, and the Democrats have controlled these places for decades, and they never seem to change, no matter how much money is spent on them. There's dependency, there's servitude, there's nihilism, and those are all features that were there historically before, and it's the same party that's doing it. So I leave you with the thought that a lot of what we call history is in fact progressive history. We should not be so naive as young scholars to think that history doesn't come from a bias, from a point of view. I have a point of view. I'm an immigrant, and when I come to America, I bring an immigrant point of view. In fact, to be honest with you, a lot of progressive history strikes me as uninteresting, because those are not, to me, the important questions to ask at all. I'm not interested in finding out whether or not people are oppressed in American society. I see that all over the world. What I'm interested in is, how does a society take poor people and make them rich? How does a society begin as one of the poorest countries in the world, as America was in 1800, and become by 1900 the richest society in the world? Who made that happen? Who thought of that idea? That's not in the history books. No one even discusses it. Fake history. And so I want to leave you with the idea that we need to have a debate about history. Figure out if I'm right, or if what you see on the History Channel is right. Yeah, if you type in fascism in Wikipedia, it's going to say that fascism is on the right. Why? Because the idiots who wrote that have been reading the same history books that I'm criticizing. So that's what they're getting it. You can't take that as confirmation of the truth, because they're just lifting it from the same source. Ultimately, it's about debate. But debate can only occur in an atmosphere of freedom. My only objection to the students who were yelling and screaming a moment ago is they don't like the atmosphere of intellectual exchange. It's threatening to them. They ultimately feel that they have a certain moral right to trump dissidents who don't agree with them, but who are perfectly willing to hear them out, as they are not willing to hear me out. And I want to leave you with the thought that you should be very intolerant of that kind of intolerance. Don't be suckers for it, just as you shouldn't be suckers for received wisdom. If you doubt anything I said today, check it out. Look it up for yourself. At the end of the day, it seems to me America is a country. Lincoln called it the last best hope on earth. And there's got to be something very uniquely powerful about it, and powerfully good about it, because it remains today the same magnet for immigrants that it was in Lincoln's day. Whether we can debate illegal versus legal, but the bottom line of it is lots of people want to come here. And this is in fact the clue that tipped me off to the idea that the multicultural mantra that all cultures are equal and no culture is better or worse, superior or inferior to any other, which I heard at Dartmouth a generation ago. Right away I knew it was a lie, because I thought to myself, if all cultures are equal, everybody would stay home. Why would you get up and leave your family and your friends and the whole world that you know? We're not talking about refugees. We're talking about people who voluntarily move from one culture to another. The only reason to do that is because you have decisively voted with your feet in the most powerful way possible that this new society is better than the one you came from. And that's why you're willing to bet your life, which is all that you have, on that decision. That is ultimately the whiff of freedom. The whiff of freedom backed up with knowledge. That's what it ultimately does to make us, here in the university context, Americans. And I urge you to follow that path, even though it requires a certain element of bravery to do that. Thank you very much. We are now into the questions, and by some indications, I have a lot to answer for, and I'm ready to do it.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you have a question, could you please start lining up towards the back of the room? Testing, hello. Okay. As we're lining up, folks, just to go over some of the quick rules here, it is make sure your question is a question, one question per person, and in the interest of time, follow-up questions will be at the discretion of Mr. D'Souza.
All right.
Thanks for coming. This university, it's kind of like oil and water having you come to the university here because it's very liberal, to put it mildly. So to have you here, you've kind of thrown out some fairly incendiary facts or claims. The year before the Civil War, not a single Republican owned a slave. The big switch is a lie. Nixon's strategy is a hoax. We hear a lot about fake news, and you're talking about fake history. But I only hear you talking about it. Why don't I hear others? I don't see conservatives out in the street with their children's history books, burning them in a pile. I don't see students here at this university taking their history books and complaining about the falsehoods in it. So why is that? And would you be willing to come to this university and debate our top scholars on these topics?
The answer is absolutely yes. Not only do I welcome that opportunity, but I will debate up to 6 opponents at the same time. My leading public critic on this, the Princeton historian Kevin Cruz, who says things like there was a big switch, and then when I point out to him that there wasn't, he says, what about Jesse Helms? What about Trent Lott? What about John Tower? And I say, well, let's not debate apples and oranges. Those men are not Dixiecrats. Just to find a Southern Democrat who became a Republican isn't going to make your case. You have to find racist Dixiecrats and show me that those guys, who are countable. If you Google racist Dixiecrats, a whole number of names will come up on your phone. We're talking about those guys. And so I told Kevin Cruz, why don't I come to your home campus, Princeton University? Let's have a debate in front of your own students. You have all the advantages of being on your home ground. You're going to have the home team advantage. His response, I won't do it. He refuses. He says it's not the proper format to resolve these issues. Think of it. Debate is not a proper format to resolve an important difference of agreement. And I take that to really mean that what he's saying is, look, here at Princeton, we have enough leftists in the history department that we've got our students completely brainwashed. Your type is not going to be welcome here because the only thing you can do is make converts, and that's going to be incendiary for us. So we're not going to let that happen. So the bottom line, this is a scary time we're living in. Now, to answer your bigger question, why only me? I will say, I think this is partly because I'm an outsider to the country. In other words, when you come as an immigrant, there are things in America that are natural to the natives because they seem normal. They're American. But the immigrant comes in and goes, wow, that's strange. So someone told me LBJ used to be a racist in his old Texas days. And then, miraculously, he saw the light. He became an enlightened progressive. He signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and this is a metaphor for the whole Democratic Party. And I thought, interesting. Usually when people have a tremendous moral conversion going from this end to this end, they give us a powerful account of it. Where's LBJ's account of how he saw the light? It doesn't exist. Then I pick up Robert Caro's biography of LBJ, I start reading through it. And I realized that LBJ was using the N-word regularly after he signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Boom! And right away I go, that makes no sense. This guy did not convert. His support of the Civil Rights Act was tactical. Tactical. And then I say, all right, let me find some biographies of LBJ so I can learn more. Surely there have been some critical biographies that try to blow the whistle and answer the question of how somebody who supposedly is this racially enlightened person could be regularly using the N-word after the Civil Rights Act. Not in the 30s, but in the mid-60s. Turns out all the biographies of LBJ I can find are written by leftists. Robert Dallek, I think Doris Kearns Goodwin wrote one. There are others. Leuchtenberg wrote one. And so there is no critical biography of LBJ. My wife went to Texas State, which is LBJ's alma mater, lionizes LBJ. LBJ Library, LBJ Street, LBJ Tree, and so on. Fake history, fake history. So bottom line of it is, I find myself having to do a lot of this work at the ground level. I found out the stuff on fascism. Look, I'm an educated guy. I went to Dartmouth. I worked in the Reagan White House. I was a think tank scholar for 20 years. All the stuff that's in my movie about fascism, I had no idea about. But I read the historian John Diggins' book called Mussolini and Fascism, a very obscure book. You have a hard time finding it. It's not in any Barnes & Noble, I'll tell you that. And it talks about how FDR loved Mussolini, and Mussolini admired FDR, and the Nazi newspapers were praising the New Deal. And I'm like, why? Not just why don't I know this, why doesn't every intelligent person in the United States know this? And then it hit me, because the progressives who dominate academia have left it out. They're not lying, they just decided it will be very embarrassing to our side for these facts to come out. Let's leave them out, and no one will be the wiser. At least until Dinesh comes along. So that's my story. Okay.
Oh, okay, sorry. Hi. It seems as though you're trying to point fingers at the Democratic Party. As an individual that has grown up in an alt-right area, I am no stranger to listening to other opinions, so I appreciate you coming out and saying your opinion. I just think that you're pointing a lot of fingers at us currently, and I feel as though as a nation, the Republican and the Democratic Party should be working together, not pointing fingers rather, but coinciding and working together to create bills and better plans for our country. And I think this is the way that we can fix America. How do you feel about that?
I agree 100%. I'm a product of the Reagan years. If you remember, Reagan and the Democrats legislated tax bills together. They did Social Security commissions together. They did a tax reform in 1986 together. There was a lot of bipartisan support for the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty with Gorbachev and the Russians. Not that there wasn't disagreement, but there was the ability to work together. And the media reflected that debate. CNN, for example, had a famous show, Crossfire, and they would have Pat Buchanan on the right, Michael Kinsley on the left. That's the America I came of age in, and I long for it now. The reason, but we don't live in that America. Think of it, would CNN today dare to have a show in which they had, let's just say, for example, me against Rachel Maddow? I mean, a debate, admittedly, that would be more like one hand clapping, but nevertheless, they wouldn't dare. And they won't, when they cancel Crossfire, they decided to go full left. They'll have a panel of 8 people, they're all anti-Trump. They don't allow debate. So how do you expect to have compromise when the mainstream media has arrayed its guns against Trump and they see their job as trying to take him out? If you want to know why I seem passionate now and not quite the same guy I was in 1985, it's this. I always thought American politics was a fair-minded debate between reasonable people who disagree, and I wrote and conducted myself that way. But then when I went through what I did with the Obama administration, when I stood in a courtroom and heard a bailiff go, United States of America versus Dinesh D'Souza, when I began to deal with these people, I realized we have seen a gangsterization of the US government. I will tell you, based upon the deepest bone in my being, that if the Obama administration could have locked me up for 20 years for giving a $20,000 political contribution, they would have done it. They would have been delighted to do it because they did not see me as a critic, but as a deadly enemy that they needed to take out. That was the way they looked at it. And so I'm saying, you're very naive if you don't realize that this is going on in America. Today, we don't live in an America where if the government comes after you, they're not going to send two gentlemen with a file to talk to you. They're going to send police cars, helicopters overhead, automatic weapons, and until it happens to you, you won't believe it. But when it does happen to you, you do become politically somewhat radicalized because you realize this is going on in our America, and we do need, before we can have compromise, we need to stop it. So that's my answer.
Rebuttal?
Sure.
Okay. So you talked about CNN as a mainstream media source, which it is. Many liberals use CNN, and many moderates also use CNN. I also find myself not seeing a lot of Republicans use CNN, but they do use Fox News, and I think that you can lump that into mainstream media. So how do you just attack CNN right now instead of focusing on how Fox News is full of Republican values, Republican traits? Bill O'Reilly was a sex offender. His show was taken off air. Like, how do you feel about that? Because that's definitely an issue that you're not addressing right now.
Here's what I'm saying. All of this has a context. So let's look at Fox News, your very example. The reason we got Fox News is that prominent conservatives were never featured on ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, NPR. The whole ensemble of public outlets would not allow this point of view to go out. So Roger Ailes, who founded Fox News, said, listen, if we're right that mainstream media is serving only half the country and not the other half, there should be room for a conservative cable channel that addresses a different set of values. So here's what I'm saying. Fox News was created as an answer to a problem. Just like Trump. Trump didn't create this division. It created him. Republicans for years said, we've appointed one Boy Scout after another, Bob Dole, Mitt Romney, John McCain. And these guys get beaten to a pulp. They get beaten to a pulp no matter how good guys they are. So you know what? We're finally going to appoint a guy who actually has huge guts, pays no attention to the other side, a little bit of a guy kind of like you guys, who's going to respond to you the way you respond to him. A little bit of a mob boss, if I have to put it frankly. But a mob boss is needed to deal with other mob bosses of the Eric Holder stripe. That's how we got Trump. Trump is the response to the problem, not the creator of the problem. Okay, let's keep moving. I just want to give other people a chance, and I'll try to go a lot faster.
Hi, I just had a quick question. Earlier tonight, you talked about how the KKK, they were Democrats. How would you respond to David Duke openly supporting Donald Trump?
I would respond in this way. It's very interesting that in the entire ensemble of the KKK universe, a universe that, by the way, started in the 1860s, I bet you if I probe you, you can't name a single other leader of the Klan, can you?
Probably not, no.
Probably not. Here's why. Because if we made a list of all the KKK leaders from 1866 to now, all the grand wizards and grand Kleagles of the Klan, and listed them all and wrote their party affiliation right next to it, do you realize that 95% of them would be Democrats?
All right, but I'm talking about the one now. Like, how do you
Right, because it's very important for you. This is what I call fake history. You cling to the one guy and you try to use the exception to create a new rule. Even though the generalization applies on the other side, you get to hide that fact by pointing to this one guy. If you can pin David Duke on Trump, you get to excuse all the Democratic lynchings and murders and hangings. There were Democratic barbecue parties while people were hanging from trees. You get to cover all that up and take all that vicious history and pin it on Trump, even though he has nothing to do with it. He grew up in New York City, for God's sake, and in Queens. And you get to blame that guy for all this stuff that people like the Clintons were part of. Clinton's mentor was Orville Forbes, the Arkansas governor, who stood in the Arkansas schoolhouse and blocked black children from getting in. You hear the media talking about that? No, because they cover up for people like Clinton and Obama, and they try to flip the blame onto Trump. So this is the transaction I'm trying to blow the whistle on.
I'm not talking about back then. I'm talking about now.
I'm talking about now also.
all of the white nationalists.
All of the white
right?
nationalists?
They mean.
Can you name 3?
I'm not a history major. I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying
Okay.
to ask you right now. It's like, why do they support Donald Trump?
They don't. I'm telling you as a fact that the vast majority of white nationalists today do not support Donald Trump. I defy you to prove that assertion.
I can pull up some videos.
You've watched videos exactly because the Charlottesville deal was put on by an Obama guy, Jason Kessler.
it's a
Look, you got
conspiracy
to.
then?
Pardon?
Is it a conspiracy then?
It's not a conspiracy. It is a staged event. The Kavanaugh event wasn't a conspiracy. It was a staged event to destroy an innocent man.
Charlottesville staged event.
Someone put it on, didn't they?
I mean, you're making it sound like it's a conspiracy that was put on
Not a
by Democrats.
conspiracy. Look, no. When people work together to a common goal, it's not a conspiracy. They're just working in the same direction. So let me give you an example. I'll give you an example that explains exactly what we're talking about. Saul Alinsky, who was the mentor of both Obama and Hillary, was approached in the 60s by a group of leftists who said to him, there's a Republican speaker coming to town. We are going to go with stickers and posters that say that the speaker is a Klansman. And Alinsky said, don't do that, that's stupid. Alinsky said, go to Bed Bath & Beyond, buy some white sheets and plug some holes into it. You guys all dress up in Klan outfits. Come to the Republican speaker's event, and while he's speaking, you jump up and down and cheer wildly. What Alinsky was basically saying is, let's stage it. Let's pretend like here are these Klansmen, and they all support the Republican, and here's the killer. Alinsky goes, the media will be there, and they will play along. They will treat this as legitimate news. They will use it to smear the right, and we will get away with it because they're on our side. A fake news event, brilliant in a certain way, I have to admit, but Alinsky was a total thug and a liar. He admitted he got his ideas from the mafia. And Alinsky says, he goes, listen, Alinsky knows that the Klan was started essentially by a delegate of the Democratic Party. It was revived by a Democratic president, Woodrow Wilson. He knew all that. His point was, how do we escape the blame for it and pin it on the other guys? That was what was going on. That was going on in the Kavanaugh hearings. Think about this woman who now says, I made it up. Right? What was she doing? She was confirming Susan Ford. Now she admits, I never knew Kavanaugh. I made the whole thing up. But think of it this way. She was hoping to be a civil rights heroine. She was hoping that even people who suspected that she was lying wouldn't care. They wouldn't check her out. They wouldn't look for her high school yearbook. They wouldn't interview her friends, and they didn't. They didn't. It took the investigators of the Judiciary Committee to find out after the fact that the woman admits she's lying. That's what I call a staged event. What else do you call it?
I wasn't taught. I don't know. You can ask me honestly. It's just like
You really think? Okay, let's use our common sense here. You really think that a group of white nationalists who know, and Klansmen who know that if they have a rally today in the Klan, if you have a rally with 100 people, there'll be 700 protesters. You think that they seriously thought they could have a conference called Unite the Right? Unite the Right. They're going to have everybody from the National Review to the Weekly Standard, the Heritage Foundation, the Hoover Institution. They're going to unite the right by having a white supremacist rally. You really think that's what they thought? I mean, if you did that, you were born yesterday.
I'm not going to try to argue on this. All right. I just wanted to hear your opinion. Okay.
Okay, well, that's it. I'm just giving it to you. All right, let's go to the next one.
So good evening. Thank you for being here. I'm actually visiting from Utah, and we're excited that we're finally sending Romney to Washington. Still waiting to hear back about that love race, but we'll hope that she wins as well. So my question for you really quick is essentially, how do we harness the energy in the conservative movement that is really kind of knocking down this idea on the left, the identity politics of if you're a minority or a part of groups XYZ, that you're automatically a blue vote. Because I mean, for example, I just saw, I think the first time they've ever done this, they had the the Young Black Leader Conference with President Trump. I believe Turning Point USA organized that. And just a lot of other evidence that there's a growing movement in the conservative side of things. So how do we harness that energy, and how do we get that out in the mainstream when a lot of the mainstream, like you're saying, won't cover it?
First of all, the way that the Democrats sustain this loyalty, high degrees of loyalty from minority communities, is they flat out lie to them about their own history. This may seem like an audacious thing to do, but they do it. For example, it is widely believed, for example, among young African Americans, that blacks who used to be Republicans in the old days became Democrats because the Democrats were the party of civil rights. This is widely believed by blacks and a lot of whites, and it's taught as true. Yeah. It is factually untrue. And my proof of this is very simple. All you have to do is look at the 1930s. In 1932, FDR got 1/3 of the black vote. And Herbert Hoover, the Republican, got 2/3 of the black vote. 4 years later, in 1936, FDR got 75% of the black vote, and the Republican candidate got less than 25. The switch did not occur in the 60s. It had nothing to do with civil rights. It had everything to do with the Great Depression and the economic hardships of it and the economic benefits of the New Deal. Now, it's not quite as romantic to tell people that story. And the left wants to manipulate the lie to its political benefit and show that the Republicans are the party of haters. So to do that, you have to lie to people and say, listen, it didn't happen in the 30s, when, even though it demonstrably, empirically, factually did. It actually happened later when blacks saw the Democrats became their friends. So what I'm getting at, this is lie upon lie. I mean, if even 1/3 of what I've told you this evening is true, a lot of the stuff that you knew to be true is false. And I understand in a certain way why people get discombobulated and walk out, because it's actually not that easy to re-examine a lot of your assumptions. It's okay to re-examine this or that, the tip of the iceberg, but if somebody tells you that something that is a core belief of yours, things like your parents are not your parents, you know, that's going to take not just an intellectual but an emotional transformation for you to be able to get your head around that one. That's the kind of stuff I'm putting out, and I'm only trying to sow some seeds and get you to check things out yourself. Next question.
Hi. As a conservative and an alumni of the Leadership Institute of Morton Blackwell, I'm sure you know, you worked with him in the Reagan administration, I had to force myself to watch your movie, and I wanted to get your comments on some of the aspects of the movie that I eventually walked out of. First, I wanted you to clarify the context of the disgusting portrayal of Malcolm X that's in your film, and then furthermore, the blackface caricature of Frederick Douglass in the film. When you're talking about Frederick Douglass, there's a blackface actor. I wanted you to touch on that.
Certainly. I'm very sorry you walked out of the film, because the truth of the matter is there was no blackface. There was no blackface actor. That scene in the Frederick Douglass in the movie is actually taken from my America movie, which I made 2 years earlier. We filmed Frederick Douglass. It's a black actor. He's listed in the credits. He's taken credit for the movie. He's come to our premieres. So just because of the lighting, someone got the crackpot idea that we were using a white actor playing blackface. They put it out in social media. Fake news. Forget about it. It's not true. Okay. And then you said something about Malcolm X. Now, what's interesting is that when I interviewed the white nationalist Richard Spencer, he brought up Malcolm X. He goes, if black people can affirm their identity and do what they want and be proud of who they are, why can't white people be proud of who they are? And why don't we have white identity politics? And so I asked him, I said, if you met Malcolm X, do you think you guys would get along? He goes, oh yeah, I would get along great, because he supported separation of the races. I support separation. What I'm getting at is, my point for using Malcolm X was simply to illustrate the point that this white nationalist was claiming to be doing nothing different than what the black nationalists do. This is a legitimate depiction in a movie. Movies are not the same as books. In a movie, if someone talks about Malcolm X, I show Malcolm X, because I want people to get movies are a visual medium. And there's nothing wrong in doing this, and the audience is in a perfectly intelligent position to see if what Richard Spencer is saying is true or false. I put it out there. I let people think about it. I have nothing to be ashamed of on that score. Next question.
This next question will be our last question, folks.
In the Charlottesville riots, many protesters and rioters were wearing MAGA hats and T-shirts, but yet you say they're part of the left or Democratic Party. And just by a quick Google search of the Charlottesville riots, it was called the Unite the Right rally. Can you please explain that?
Yes, I'll explain it. The Unite the Right rally was the organizers who put it up. the people who staged the rally were doing the ultimate of fake news. And let me tell you why they were doing it. Why would somebody take a guy, let's explore Richard Spencer since I've gotten to know him somewhat. What's he up to? What's he trying to do? The truth of it is, he is a white nationalist. He is also a statist. He believes, he's even said publicly, I like socialism, but he's a national socialist, no surprise. He has a certain affinity with neo-Nazism, National Socialism. He's on the left, he knows that. But he also knows that as a white guy, he is unwelcome at the multicultural picnic. Because in today's left, every ethnic identity is affirmed except whites. He knows that he's the villain of the progressive narrative today. And so he thinks to himself, I'm irrelevant. I have no place on the right because the right doesn't believe in identity politics. They don't affirm white nationalism. Yes, they affirm nationalism, but it's American nationalism. So what do? How do I become a really important person? And then he gets a diabolical idea. What if I play along with the left's idea of who I am? What if I play the part of a Trump-supporting white nationalist? I will become one of the most famous people in America. I will become so radioactive that when I go to Florida to speak, I meaning Richard Spencer, the governor will declare a state of emergency as if I were some sort of a hurricane. And in fact, that proved to be true. Richard Spencer went from a nobody to being a nationally prominent figure by essentially giving the leftist media what they wanted. They wanted a script where they could pin white nationalism on the right. That's why it's so important for him to wear his Trump hat. He doesn't agree with Trump. If you listen to my interview with him, it's obvious he disagrees with Trump on everything. And he admits it. But he plays the script because it vaults him. It's not the first time. This is why I mentioned a couple times the Kavanaugh hearings, because people say, well, why would someone make it up? I can think of 1 million reasons why, if one were to look at the GoFundMe page. It's very profitable. I submit to you a thought experiment. If Susan Ford had, let's just say, said a year later, like this other woman did, I made the whole thing up, I bet you there would be people on the left who would say, congratulations. Brilliant tactical strike on a really bad guy who might overturn Roe versus Wade. You are a civil rights heroine and you deserve an award. And this shows the level of deceitfulness to which our politics has actually reached. It's a politics that results in smears, false accusations. A couple of weeks ago, I guess now, I was speaking at Liberty University. I was talking about LBJ, and I said that LBJ used the N-word. Except I used it because I was quoting LBJ. And I said, I'm not getting this from some dubious source. I'm getting this from Robert Caro and Doris Kearns Goodwin. And I cited my sources. And boom, the next day on a leftist Christian website, D'Souza uses the N-word. I was quoting LBJ. It was blindingly obvious but they were doing this because they thought it's so incendiary that if the mere accusation will cause other people to jump on it, and will destroy Dinesh's career because he used the N-word. The problem was that when they clipped the video, even the shortened video that they showed made it obvious that I was quoting LBJ. And so their own viewers were like, didn't you see the video? He's quoting somebody else. And if that makes him the user of the N-word, then you've used the N-word because you just quoted him. So this kind of lowball tactics is now the America that we live in, and it's come into academic discourse, and it's very terrifying because no real discussion can occur without it. I'm going to give you the last question since you seem so determined, and you knew it was the last question, but you're sticking your neck out, so you get to ask the last question, and I'll wrap up. Go ahead.
Hello, Mr. D'Souza. My name is Miranda Rispoli Sotomayor. I'm a proud Latina. I'm a proud come from a proud family of immigrants, and I'm an even prouder Democrat. And my question here today is based off a comment that you said earlier. You said that the merits of the Three-Fifths Compromise is up for debate. So who are you, or who is anyone, to debate the merit of one's humanity? How can you deny the legacy the Three-Fifths Compromise has had and that slavery has had on the extent of racism in the United States?
Look, right here in the first row, I think she got up. There's my wife, Debbie. She's from Venezuela. Her mom is Mexican-American. I'm married to a Latina. She's a first-generation immigrant. I'm a first-generation immigrant. So we're all coming to America and trying to make sense of all this. Now, quite honestly, I think you would have to admit that I have done nothing in this talk today to either minimize or downplay, far from downplaying racism. I've stressed it. I'm simply pointing the finger of blame where it belongs, and you're trying to hide it. See, the difference is, because you are a Democrat, you are willing to overlook the crimes of the Democratic Party. But let me tell you this, the Democratic Party is in fact, the party of slavery and segregation and Jim Crow and the Ku Klux Klan and lynching and all the horrors of American history, including complicity with fascism, the internment of the Japanese Americans in World War II, the reigniting of the Klan in the late teens and 20s. All of this was done by Democrats, and they were opposed all along the way by Republicans. So the problem is that today, if you're a Democrat, you're a committed Democrat, you like the welfare state, you like Obamacare, or you're a progressive historian, you are in the awkward position of having to confess to a whole series of crimes that your team did. Crimes, by the way, that the Democratic Party has never admitted, never apologized for, never paid 1 penny of restitution for. So this is a very ugly position to be in. And the only way to do it is to lie through your teeth. Hide the actions of the Democratic Party, blame everybody else. America did it, the white man did it, the Southerners did it, everybody except the guys who actually did it. So my point is this, you look after this talk and see if the specific allegations I've been making. Someone mentioned one, and I'm going to close with this one. I said, because I was speaking on a campus, and I'll close with this, and I was pointing out the Democratic Party's complicity in slavery. Something that's, by the way, routinely denied. But once I make my case, the professor stands up and I realize I kind of had him, so he goes into what I would call defense mode. And he goes, Dinesh, your talk is extremely simplistic. He goes, you are pointing the finger of blame at the Democrats, and you are ignoring the fact that there was plenty of blame to go around. So this is the fallback position. Everyone's to blame. And I realized that when this happens in a debate, it's really important to crystallize the argument and settle it. And so I said to him, and I'm saying to you now, that in 1860, which was the year before the Civil War, I said, no Republican owned a slave. Now, I did not say no Republican leader owned a slave. I said no Republican in the United States owned a slave. And what's so crushing about this, if true, is that it destroys the argument. It puts the blame of slavery entirely on one side. It shows that the 4 million slaves in America in 1860 were every single one of them owned by a Democrat. And the beauty of this statement is that it requires only a single counterexample to refute me. All you have to do is give me the name of one Republican who owned a slave. I would have to take it back. But to this date, years later, no single valid counterexample has ever surfaced. A few months ago, a guy from the University of Michigan wrote me, he goes, Dinesh, I got you. Ulysses S. Grant inherited a slave on his wife's side. And I replied and I said, well, this would seem to be kind of a touche, and the facts as you state them are true, but at the time that this happened, I have to point out, Ulysses S. Grant was a Democrat. He became a Republican later. And so, again, if what I'm saying is true, a lot of the nonsense that you have been spoon-fed is false. Listen. Listen, you can talk to my wife later. She'll be happy to talk to you in Spanish, but or then speak English, because that's the language I understand. You're not going to beat me by throwing Spanish at me. I'll reply in Hindustani. How's that? How's that for you? What is this, language trumps? I'm willing to listen. Go ahead. I'm listening. Go for it.
All right. Here's my question to you. You ready for it?
I'm ready.
First of all, I'm a fan of yours. I just figured if I acted like a baby liberal, you'd listen to me.
What? What is this? Fake news?
I mean Puerto Rico, so I'm Caribbean just like your wife. Here's my question to you, it's very important to me, to my heart. Even though I'm an American citizen, I come from a different culture, and I commend all Americans because you got the greatest country in the world. My question to you as a conservative influencer And by that I mean you are my Mount Rushmore of people who influence. Earlier on you mentioned about the plantations, and I noticed you mentioned every state, every city Democrats control, and you failed to mention the plantation on my island, Puerto Rico. I'm gonna do a little math on you. We American citizens by birth, so you and I are very similar, with the difference that you probably work hard for your citizenship that I did. So, my island for decades have a population of 4 million Puerto Ricans. There's so many Puerto Ricans in the United States that if you bring them back to the island, it will probably sink. However, and you can look at this fact, there's over 100,000 Puerto Ricans for the past 20 years that are leaving the island by the 100,000s every year. Yet our population is still close to 4 million people. Reason is we breed as fast, if not faster than Mexicans. Sorry if I'm not political. Now my question to you is, as an influencer and conservative, how is it that conservatives will never do a lecture like this in our island? Because as a former liberal, I came to this country thinking that whites and Republicans from the South were racist and had something against them, right? Which kind of like brings you a victim mentality. So if you make the math, and you saw it in the last election, the population, especially in places like Orlando, New York, you saw who just got elected in New York.
Yeah.
And Sonia Sotomayor, famous Puerto Rican liberal judge. So why is
All right, let me answer.
Why is it that conservatives doesn't seem to grasp the threat? And I don't mean a threat like we're a threat, because I'm not a threat. But I'm saying I used to be a little threat. I used to have this mentality. I'm not saying everybody in Puerto Rico has it, because again, we're 4 million people. But I'm saying the majority. I'm welcome anybody who wants to go to visit Puerto Rico, and you'll notice that, everybody, the majority of people hate Trump, hate Republicans. I mean, same talking points. So why is it about, not Republicans, because that's a whole different topic, but what is it about conservatives that they don't reach out to this population? They worry so much about Mexicans coming to this country, yet you have a bunch of liberal plantation right next door where people can come freely, no problem, and vote for Democrats and ruin everything that you're working for right now.
All right, a very good question. And
Sorry, just a follow-up question.
by the way, guys, he's speaking here tomorrow night.
Sorry, and this is a little bit more of a challenge, not
Sure.
because I'm against you, but because I respect you, I have to challenge you. I have watched all your movies, and I'm still don't know why, even though you're pointing the finger at the Democrats, which I don't like, I think they're a bunch of hypocrites, but I noticed that you always fail to mention the root cause of the problem for both conservatives and Democrats, which is the Federal Reserve, which is a private bank. In all of your documentaries, even in the Hillary's America, you mentioned Jackson as a Democrat. However, he fought the banks, and even Trump put his portrait back in the White House for a reason, because he's fighting the bank. I mean, I believe so, I hope so. That's the reason I voted. Hope you don't let me down. So that will be my second question to you as a challenge. Why is it that you never mentioned the Federal Reserve?
Well, I actually have written about the Federal Reserve. I'll be honest with you. A movie, and I'm making movies I'm not making them for Netflix, I'm making them for the theater. Movies, by and large, have to engage emotionally compelling themes. The history of the Federal Reserve, very interesting subject, very difficult to depict in a movie. So I write books that lay out arguments, but my movies are narratives. They're a story. And I admit that in a story, a lot gets left out. And in fact, think, for example, I'd love to put sources in my movie, footnotes, and I can't do that. It's a movie. People they take their family, they're going to, Saturday night. Now, I'll look for an occasion to come to Puerto Rico. In my own world, which is, Debbie, my wife, grew up in the barrios of South Texas. And it is a tragedy that the Republican Party of Texas, because they dominate the rest of the state, they never go down there. It's blue, it's Beto country, and it's terrible because those are conservative people down there, and they want upward mobility. And if you offered them a ladder to contrast with the Democrats' rope, they'd go for it. But no one goes down there to make the case. So in any event, Rafael Cruz and Debbie and I were going down to the barrios of South Texas later this month to make a presentation to 1,000 people. They've never had anything like it. We're in a small way trying to start that. But if you're asking, does it need to occur on a big scale? Yeah, I think that Trump needs to go to the inner cities. I think he needs to go to the barrios. I think if he can show that he can make America work for those people, and it's not just believe in the Constitution, the rah, 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 the Star Spangled Banner, don't take a knee. It's not that. You have to actually see the ladders of opportunity that's an alternative to the dependency of the Democratic Party. And if you do, then you have a real choice. You go, do I want to live my life in which I stand in line for cheese, and I go and have a social worker come and check that my family is okay? Or do I'm an independent, self-respecting, dignified person who wants to live my own life and be the architect of my own destiny? That's the America I came here for, and my politics is based on that. So that's the America I fight to defend. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.